It was my 40th birthday. A big milestone, right? You'd think the day would be all about celebrating, surrounded by the people who mattered most, soaking in their love and attention. That was the plan, anyway. My wife, Emma, had organized this elaborate party at our home. Friends, family, neighbors, everyone was there, raising glasses, laughing, and wishing me well. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, but there was something off, a tension I couldn't quite place. Emma, God, where do I even start? She was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Stunningly beautiful, sharp as a whip, and as charismatic as they come. People adored her, and she knew it. But there was always this edge to her, this sense that she wasn't just playing the game, she was running it. I loved her though. Loved her with everything I had, even if sometimes it felt like I was standing in the shadow of her spotlight. The night started strong. Drinks flowed, music filled the air, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. Emma was in her element, working the room like she was born to do it. She had this way of making every single person she spoke to feel like they were the center of the universe. Watching her, I couldn't help but feel lucky, proud, even. But then Ethan showed up, and everything started to unravel. Ethan wasn't on the guest list. He came with his mother Carol, who'd been a friend of Emma's family for years. Carol was one of those people you couldn't say no to. If she wanted to bring her son, well, you just let her. Ethan was, what, 24? 25? A kid, really, but with this brooding intensity about him that made him seem older. I noticed Emma's eyes light up when she saw him. Not in a motherly or friendly way, but in a way that made my stomach twist. "Oh, Ethan, it's been ages!" Emma gushed, throwing her arms around him like he was some long-lost lover instead of the kid who used to mow our lawn in the summers. From that moment, it was like she had a magnet attached to her. Everywhere Ethan went, Emma wasn't far behind. She laughed too hard at his jokes, touched his arm too often, leaned in too close. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. I mean, come on, this was my wife. My wife, who had just spent weeks planning this incredible party for me. She couldn't. But the more I watched, the harder it became to ignore. She'd disappear for 10, 15 minutes at a time, always with some excuse about needing to check on the caterers or make sure the dessert table was stocked. I started asking around, the caterers, the bartenders, anyone who might know where she'd gone. "Oh, Mrs. Emma? Haven't seen her," they'd say, looking just as puzzled as I felt. By the time the party wound down, my head was spinning. Guests started filtering out, leaving behind the usual mess of empty glasses and half-eaten cake. Emma, of course, was nowhere to be found. I headed upstairs, hoping to find her in our room, maybe taking a break from all the chaos. What I found instead was a piece of her jewelry, a gold bracelet I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. It was lying on the floor near the guest bathroom. Not exactly where you'd expect to find it unless... I shook the thought from my head. No way. I must have dropped it myself while getting ready earlier. That had to be it. But even as I tried to convince myself, I could feel the doubt creeping in. When Emma finally came upstairs, she was all smiles, acting like nothing was wrong. "What a great night, huh?" she said, kicking off her heels and flopping onto the bed. "Everyone had such a good time. Especially you, I hope?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. It was great." But my voice sounded hollow, even to me. Emma didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she didn't care. She just rolled over and started scrolling through her phone like the night had been completely ordinary. The morning after the party, the house was a wreck. Empty wine glasses cluttered every surface, and the faint smell of smoke from the patio lingered in the air. Emma was her usual self, bright, energetic, and annoyingly unaffected by the mess. I was still nursing the strange feeling from the night before, though I told myself it was just paranoia. We were halfway through cleaning up when my phone buzzed. A text from Carol. "Thanks for letting Ethan tag along last night. He really needed to get out of the house." I read the message twice, frowning. "Hey," I said, holding up my phone. "Did you invite Ethan to the party?" Emma didn't even look up. "What?" "No. Carol must have brought him last minute. Why? No reason, I muttered, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. As the week went on, I couldn't shake the image of Emma and Ethan from the party, the way her hand lingered on his arm, the way he blushed when she laughed at his jokes. I tried to put it out of my head, but it felt like the harder I tried, the more the doubts crept in. By Friday, I'd almost convinced myself to drop it entirely. But then Ethan showed up at the house. It was mid-afternoon, and I was in the garage fixing a shelf that had been wobbly for months. I heard the faint rumble of a car pulling into the driveway, followed by a knock at the door. Emma called out from the kitchen, "I'll get it!" A few minutes later, I wandered inside, wiping my hands on a rag. That's when I saw him, Ethan, standing in the living room, looking awkward as hell while Emma leaned against the wall, smiling like a cat with cream. "Ethan!" I said, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, he was just in the neighborhood," Emma said quickly, cutting him off before he could answer. "Thought he'd stop by and say hi." Ethan nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, just wanted to thank you guys for the party. It was really nice." I stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to push or let it go. Emma's smile never wavered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Something was definitely up. "Well, it's good to see you," I said finally, keeping my tone light. "Can I get you something to drink?" "No, I'm good," Ethan mumbled, glancing at Emma. I should probably get going." "Don't be silly," Emma said, stepping closer to him. "You just got here." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Maybe just for a bit." I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the whole interaction felt off. There was this strange energy between them, like they were in on some secret I wasn't privy to. I decided to stick around, making small talk and keeping the conversation light, but my mind was racing. After about half an hour, Ethan finally left, muttering something about errands he needed to run. As soon as the door closed behind him, I turned to Emma. "What was that about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "What do you mean?" she said, already walking toward the kitchen. "Him showing up here out of nowhere. The way you—" I stopped myself, shaking my head. "Never mind." Emma paused, looking over her shoulder with a raised eyebrow. "The way I what?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Forget it." She shrugged, turning back to the fridge. "You're being weird, you know that?" "Yeah, maybe," I muttered, but the knot in my stomach didn't go away. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in my head. Emma's smile, Ethan's awkwardness, the way she'd cut him off before he could answer my question. It all felt too calculated. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe that I was just being paranoid, reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right, and I was going to find out what it was. The weekend passed in a haze of restless thoughts and unanswered questions. Emma carried on as if nothing had happened, completely oblivious, or maybe just indifferent, to the storm brewing in my head. Every laugh, every casual brush of her hand against mine felt like an act. It was almost like she was trying too hard to be normal, and that only made my suspicions grow. By Monday morning I'd had enough. I needed answers, and if Emma wasn't going to give them to me, I'd have to find them myself. So, while she was out running errands, I started snooping. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type of guy who goes through his wife's things on a whim. But this wasn't a whim. This was a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. I started small, checking her phone while it charged in the kitchen. Her texts were clean, almost too clean. No incriminating messages, no strange names or numbers. Just a few exchanges with Carol about the party and some mundane chats with her friends. But then I opened her email. That's where I found the first breadcrumb. It was an email from a burner account, the kind you'd create if you didn't want anyone tracing it back to you. The subject line read, "Meeting confirmed." My pulse quickened as I clicked it open. "Tuesday, 7 p.m. Usual place. Don't be late." No name, no context, nothing to indicate who it was from or what it was about. But the timestamp was recent, sent just the day before. And usual place? What the hell did that mean? My mind immediately went to Ethan. Could it be him? Was she meeting him somewhere behind my back? I closed the email and returned everything to its original state, careful not to leave any traces. If Emma was hiding something, she couldn't know I was onto her. At least, not yet. The next day, I played it cool. I acted normal, like I hadn't just discovered a cryptic email that all but confirmed my worst fears. Emma was her usual charming self, making breakfast and chatting about her plans for the day. "I've got a meeting with the garden club this evening," she said casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Oh yeah?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "What time?" "Around 7. She replied, not missing a beat. "Don't wait up. These things always run late." "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. But inside I was reeling. 7 o'clock. Exactly when the email had said. That evening, I waited until Emma left before grabbing my keys and heading out. I had no idea where the usual place was, but I had a hunch. There was a little coffee shop downtown where Emma liked to meet her friends. It was quiet, tucked away, and private. If she was meeting someone, that's where she'd be. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, careful to stay out of sight. My heart pounded as I approached the window. The place was mostly empty, just a few patrons scattered at tables, sipping coffee or typing away on laptops. And then I saw her. Emma was sitting in a corner booth, her back to the window. Across from her was Ethan. They were leaning in close, speaking in hushed tones. Her hand was on his, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his palm. He looked nervous, glancing around like he expected someone to burst in at any moment. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language said it all. This wasn't a friendly chat or a casual catch-up. This was something else entirely. Something intimate. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place. Part of me wanted to storm in, to confront them both and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had been living in denial for days, needed more. I needed to know exactly what was going on before I acted. So, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the window. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to show their faces and the way they were sitting. Proof. Then I turned and walked away, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. When I got home, Emma was already back, lounging on the couch like she hadn't just been caught in what looked suspiciously like a romantic rendezvous. "How was the garden club?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Oh, it was great," she said, flashing me that dazzling smile. "We're planning this big charity event next month. It's going to be amazing." "Sounds like a lot of work," I replied, forcing a chuckle. "It is," she agreed, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "But it's worth it." I nodded, swallowing the bow rising in my throat. I bet. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Emma and Ethan in that coffee shop played over and over in my mind, mocking me. I had the proof I needed, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed to figure out my next move. By the next morning, my anger had hardened into something colder, sharper. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was determined. If Emma wanted to play games, then I'd beat her at her own. But I wasn't going to confront her directly. No, that would be too easy. She needed to feel the sting of betrayal, to understand the depth of what she'd done to me. I spent the day crafting a plan. It had to be meticulous, something that would not only expose her lies but leave her reeling. First, I started digging deeper into her life. I checked her social media accounts, her emails, even her browsing history. Every detail was a potential weapon. I'd learned long ago that Emma loved to leave breadcrumbs, little clues that she thought were too clever for anyone to piece together. But she'd underestimated me. My first move was to gather more evidence. The photo from the coffee shop was a start, but I needed more. So I decided to follow her the next time she left the house, discreetly tracking her movements. If she was meeting Ethan again, I'd catch her in the act. At the same time, I started reaching out to people in our social circle, subtly probing for information. I framed it as casual conversation, asking about the party, about Emma, about Ethan. Most people didn't have much to say, but a few offhand comments hinted that Emma's flirtatious behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. She's always had that energy about her, one of her friends said, laughing nervously. You know, the kind that makes men trip over themselves. I smiled politely, but inside, my resolve only grew stronger. Emma's charm had always been a double-edged sword, and now it was cutting me deep. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The final piece of my plan was to turn the tables. If Emma wanted to play the role of the perfect wife while sneaking around behind my back, I'd show her what it felt like to be blindsided. I started planting seeds of doubt in her mind, small comments and gestures that made her second-guess herself. You've been so busy lately, I'd say, feigning concern. Are you sure everything's okay? She'd brush it off with a smile, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Good. Let her wonder. Let her squirm. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. My plan was in motion, and all I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to strike. By the time Monday rolled around, my plan was starting to take shape. Emma had no idea I was onto her, and I planned to keep it that way. Every smile, every casual conversation between us was another opportunity for me to mask my true intentions. She thought she had everything under control, but she didn't know the storm I was about to unleash. First, I needed a way to catch her in the act, undeniable proof that would blow her web of lies apart. The coffee shop meeting had been a lucky break, but luck wasn't enough anymore. I needed certainty. I decided to install a tracking app on her phone. It was easy enough to do while she was in the shower. A few clicks, a quick sync, and suddenly, her movements were an open book. Later that day, I started the next phase of my plan, creating the perfect diversion. Emma had always been good at hiding her tracks, but I knew her Achilles heel, her ego. She loved being the center of attention, loved it when people hung on her every word. So, I played to that. I proposed we throw a small dinner party that weekend. You've been so busy lately, I said, feigning sweetness. I thought it might be nice to have some friends over, relax a bit. Her eyes lit up at the idea. Of course, she loved hosting. That sounds perfect, she said, already mentally planning the menu. Who should we invite? Oh, you know, the usual group. Carol, Mike, Ethan. I threw Ethan's name in casually, watching her reaction. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before nodding. Sure, that sounds great. Gotcha. Over the next few days, I played my role to perfection, helping with preparations and acting like the doting husband. Meanwhile, the tracker on her phone revealed her every move. She met Ethan twice that week, once at his place and once at a park on the outskirts of town. I snapped photos from a distance, documenting every moment. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Now it was time to bait the trap. The night of the party arrived, and Emma was in her element, charming everyone with her wit and laughter. She looked stunning, of course, dressed in a sleek black dress that clung to her curves. Even I had to admit she could light up a room when she wanted to. But tonight, her radiance only fueled my determination. Ethan showed up late, as I expected he would. He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Emma like he didn't know where to stand. Emma, on the other hand, was a picture of calm. She greeted him warmly but kept her distance, careful not to draw too much attention. The evening unfolded smoothly, on the surface, at least. But beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, the tension was palpable. I caught the way Emma's eyes flit toward Ethan when she thought no one was watching. I noticed how he avoided her gaze, his discomfort growing with every passing minute. As the night wore on, I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed to check on the food. In reality, I was setting up the final piece of my plan. I had placed a small recording device in the living room earlier that day, hidden beneath the coffee table. Now, all I had to do was wait for the right moment to leave it running. When I returned to the party, I found Emma laughing with Carol and Mike, her charisma in full swing. I joined the conversation, playing the part of the oblivious husband. But my eyes were on Ethan. He was standing by himself near the bar, nursing a drink and looking like he wanted to disappear. Perfect. Ethan, I called, waving him over. Come join us. He hesitated, glancing at Emma before forcing a smile and walking over. The next hour was a master class in manipulation. I kept the conversation light, steering it toward topics that would make Ethan squirm. Every now and then, I'd throw in a subtle jab, just enough to make him sweat. By the time the party wound down, Ethan looked ready to bolt. Emma, for her part, was doing her best to act normal, but I could see the cracks starting to show. Good. Let them both stew. When the last guest finally left, Emma turned to me with that dazzling smile of hers. That was a great night, wasn't it? It was, I said, kissing her cheek. You were amazing, as always. She beamed, clearly pleased with herself. But as she headed upstairs to change, I stayed behind, pocketing the recording device from the coffee table. The night had been a success. Now, all I had to do was wait for the pieces to fall into place. The day after the party, I woke up early, my mind already racing with what lay ahead. Emma was still asleep, sprawled out in bed like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood there for a moment, staring at her. She looked peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew better now. I went downstairs, brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, and reviewed everything I'd gathered. The photos, the GPS logs, and now, the recording from the dinner party. I hadn't listened to it yet, but my gut told me it was worth checking out. Plugging in the recorder, I pressed play and leaned back, letting the muffled sounds of the party fill the room. At first, it was all mundane, laughter, clinking glasses, snippets of conversation. But then, about 2 hours in, I heard it. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the ambient noise. Emma's voice. We'll talk later. Not here. Ethan's reply was barely audible, but his tone was anxious. I don't think this is a good idea anymore. Oh, don't be such a baby. Emma snapped, her voice sharper now. Just stick to the plan, and everything will be fine. Trust me. I rewound the clip and played it again, my anger flaring hotter with each word. They had a plan? Fine. I'd let them carry it out, just long enough to watch it fall apart. When Emma finally came downstairs, she was her usual cheery self. Good morning, she sang, kissing me on the cheek. What's the plan for today? I thought we could just relax, I said, forcing a smile. Maybe catch a movie later. Sounds good, she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I could use a quiet day. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, though, I was already several steps ahead. Later that afternoon, while Emma was out running errands, I set the next phase of my plan in motion. First, I printed out the incriminating photos and tucked them into an envelope. Then, I drafted an anonymous letter carefully worded to stir the pot without revealing too much. To whom it may concern. You deserve to know the truth about what's been happening behind your back. Enclosed are photos and evidence that will speak for themselves. Take this as a warning, not everything is as it seems. I sealed the envelope and addressed it to Ethan's mother. It was petty, sure, but I wanted the fallout to be as messy as possible. If Emma and Ethan thought they could hide their little secret, they were in for a rude awakening. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Emma returned home in the evening, chattering about the bargains she'd found while shopping. I nodded along, barely listening. My mind was on the envelope, which I'd already dropped off at the post office. The following days were tense, but I played my part perfectly. Emma, for her part, seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks in her facade started to show. And then, on Thursday evening, the first crack appeared. We were sitting in the living room, watching a show, when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her expression shifting subtly as she read the message. It was quick, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She set the phone down and tried to act normal, but her fingers tapped nervously against the armrest. Something wrong? I asked casually. No, nothing, she said, forcing a smile. Just Carol asking about plans for next week. Ah, I said, turning back to the screen. But I knew better. Whatever that message was, it wasn't from Carol. Later that night, while Emma was in the shower, I checked her phone. The message was from Ethan. We need to talk. Urgent. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It was clear my envelope had reached its destination. Now, the real game was about to begin. I placed the phone back where I found it, and returned to bed, pretending to be asleep when Emma came out of the bathroom. She slid in beside me, her movements stiff and cautious. Good, I thought. Let her worry. Let her stew. The next few days were a whirlwind. Emma became increasingly tense, her usual charm faltering under the weight of whatever was happening between her and Ethan. She started spending more time on her phone, sneaking off to make calls when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And then, on Saturday morning, the bomb finally dropped. Emma got a call that sent her rushing out of the house without so much as an explanation. I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I kept my distance as I followed Emma. I didn't want to spook her, so I stayed a few cars behind, careful to make sure she didn't notice me in the rearview mirror. The streets were quiet, just the low hum of early morning traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She drove with purpose, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her eyes darting in the rearview every now and then as if she could feel my presence. But I kept my cool. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment she would lead me straight to the heart of the secret she'd been keeping. After about 15 minutes, she pulled up to a small, nondescript house at the edge of town. It looked ordinary enough, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood with no obvious signs of anything suspicious. But I knew better now. I parked across the street, pretending to check my phone, my heart pounding as I watched Emma walk up to the door and knock. It was almost too easy. She hadn't even tried to cover her tracks. A few seconds later, the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and dark hair, wearing a t-shirt and jeans that looked a little too worn to be stylish. I couldn't place him right away, but something about the way Emma greeted him made my stomach twist. She leaned in for a quick hug before stepping inside without a word. I waited a moment, watching them through the blinds. No one else came out, no one passed by. It was just them. My grip tightened on the wheel as I tried to keep my breathing steady. This wasn't just a fling, I thought. No, this was something deeper, something far more dangerous. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I stayed parked for a while, letting the minutes tick by, wondering what was going on inside. Every second felt like an eternity. But eventually, Emma came back out, her expression guarded, and she got into her car again. This time, I followed closer, but not too closely, still making sure she didn't suspect anything. She drove back home without stopping, and as soon as she pulled into the driveway, I parked a few houses down. I watched her go inside, and I felt a gnawing feeling in my gut that I couldn't ignore. Whatever had just happened, it was only the beginning. The game had changed. And now, I had to be smarter. As I sat there, waiting, I couldn't help but wonder if she'd suspect what I already knew, if she finally realized that I was no longer in the dark. Would she try to cover her tracks more carefully now? Or would she make a mistake? I didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The rest of the day passed in a haze, my mind replaying the scene at the house over and over. I couldn't shake the image of Emma with that man, her body language so familiar, and yet so different from the way she'd been with me. She'd been hiding something from the start, and now I had proof. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her walking into that house, the door closing behind her like it was sealing off everything I thought I knew about her. I got up at 3 a.m., grabbed my coat, and went for a walk, hoping the cold air would clear my head. I walked aimlessly for a while, the dark streets almost comforting in their emptiness. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's about Emma. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, unsure whether this was another part of their game or something more. There was no name, no context, just those words. And yet, something about it felt real, like a threat I couldn't ignore. I quickly typed back. Who is this? A minute passed, then the reply came. Someone who knows what's really going on. My pulse raced. This was it, I thought. This could be the breakthrough I needed. I stared at the message, torn between anger and anticipation. I couldn't trust whoever this was, but I couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. I typed my response. Where and when? The reply was almost immediate. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. Be there. I stood there for a moment, the wind biting at my skin, my breath visible in the cold night air. Tomorrow. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it was going to change everything. The next day dragged on, every hour stretching longer than the last. I kept thinking about Emma, about what she might be doing, who she might be talking to. Every time I saw her glance at her phone or slip away for a moment, my mind raced with possibilities. By the time 8 p.m. came around, I was already on edge. I drove to the location the message had given me, an old, run-down diner on the outskirts of town. It didn't seem like the kind of place anyone would want to meet, but then again, nothing about this situation was normal anymore. I sat in my car for a while, watching the diner, waiting for any sign of movement. The place was deserted, save for a few cars parked outside. It was the perfect setting for something shady. My stomach churned as I finally made my way inside. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in. The smell of stale coffee and grease filled the air, the lights flickering overhead. The place was empty except for one man sitting at the counter, his back to me. He didn't turn around when I walked in, but I knew it was him. There was something about the way he sat, his posture so casual, as if he was waiting for me. I took a seat at the booth across from him, trying to keep my composure. "You're late," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't answer. Instead, I waited, my eyes narrowing as I tried to make sense of the situation. Who was this guy, and why was he involved in all of this? What did he know about Emma? "You're probably wondering who I am," he continued, turning to face me. His eyes were dark, almost calculating. "I know everything about your wife. About what she's been doing. And I know you're looking for answers. But let me tell you, what you think you know. It's only the tip of the iceberg." I sat back, my heart pounding in my chest. This was bigger than I thought. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. "Emma isn't the person you think she is," he said, leaning in slightly. "She's been working with Ethan. They've been planning something big. And it's not just about you, it's about all of us. You're in way deeper than you realize." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Ethan, that name again. I'd known they were involved, but this? This was a whole new level of betrayal. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want you to understand the bigger picture," he said with a smirk. "I'm here to help you, if you're willing to listen. But first, you need to stop playing their game. You need to start playing mine." I didn't know if I could trust this man, but I didn't have much of a choice. He knew things I didn't, and if he was right, Emma's betrayal ran much deeper than I ever imagined. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about survival. And I had a feeling that everything I thought I knew was about to come crashing down. The next few days were a blur. I didn't know who to trust anymore, certainly not Emma, and definitely not Ethan. And yet, somehow, I couldn't let go. I still needed answers. I was too deep in this now to back out. The mysterious man had made it clear that the stakes were higher than I realized. They'd been planning something for months, but what exactly was their endgame? What did they want? I kept thinking about the business card he'd given me. It was a simple, no-frills card with a number and an address. A piece of paper that was now my only connection to whatever tangled web I'd found myself in. I had to make contact, but I didn't know how to approach this. What exactly did I expect from someone like him? By Saturday, I was feeling the pressure. Emma was still acting strangely, but now, instead of pretending everything was fine, she seemed distant, her eyes often unfocused, like she was lost in thought. Every time I asked her what was wrong, she'd brush it off with a tight smile or a nonchalant "Nothing, just tired." I had to make my move. I took a deep breath and dialed the number on the business card. The phone rang a few times before someone picked up. "This is Mike," the voice said, the same gravelly tone I remembered from the diner. Mike, it's me. I need to know more. About everything. What's really going on with Emma? And Ethan? There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. I thought you might call. You've been thinking, haven't you? You've figured out it's bigger than you thought. I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my cool. Yeah, I've figured that much out. But I still don't understand what I'm supposed to do. You've got the answers, right? You're asking the wrong questions, Mike said, his voice becoming serious. It's not about what you're supposed to do. It's about what you're willing to do. If you want to end this, if you want to stop whatever it is they've got planned, you're going to have to act fast. My chest tightened. The sense of urgency in his voice was palpable. Where do I go? I asked, barely able to get the words out. Tonight. Midnight. The old factory on 5th, don't be late. And don't bring anyone. Not even her. The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone in my hand, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Tonight. Midnight. The old factory on 5th. What the hell was going to happen there? What was I walking into? The day dragged on in slow motion. I couldn't shake the feeling that every moment was leading up to something that would change everything. And then there was Emma. She still had no idea that I was onto her, or at least I thought she didn't. The way she was acting, though, I could tell something was different. She was nervous, almost guilty. But of what? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, my stomach churned. I told Emma I was going out for a while, said I had some work to catch up on. She didn't seem suspicious, but then again, I wasn't sure if she'd even notice. She was too wrapped up in whatever she was hiding. I left the house quietly, my mind spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said, about how this was bigger than I thought. Bigger than any affair or betrayal. There was something more at play here, and I was about to find out what it was. I drove to the factory, my headlights cutting through the dark streets. The building loomed in front of me, an old, rusted structure that looked abandoned, its windows broken and its walls covered in grime. The eerie silence of the place made my skin crawl. I parked a little way off, watching from a distance, trying to see if anyone was around. I checked my phone, 12:02. I was late. But I had to be sure. I had to make sure this wasn't some kind of trap. I stepped out of the car and approached the factory, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light escaping through the crack. I hesitated for a moment, but then pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled musty, and the sound of my footsteps was the only thing breaking the stillness. I walked deeper into the building, my eyes adjusting to the low light. And then I saw him, Mike, standing in the middle of the large room, his hands shoved in his pockets, his posture relaxed but alert. "You came," he said with a small grin. "Why am I here?" I asked, the frustration in my voice barely contained. "What's all this about?" Mike looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're here because you've been asking the wrong questions," he said slowly, stepping closer. "Emma isn't just some pawn in this. She's the queen." I blinked, confused. "What the hell are you talking about? Emma's not the victim here. She's been in control all along. You're not the one they were keeping in the dark. You were the distraction." My stomach dropped, a wave of realization hitting me. "What? No, that can't be right." But Mike just nodded. "She's been playing both of you. She's been working with Ethan, but that's just the beginning. The real plan? It's all about power, control over you, over everything you think you know." I shook my head in disbelief. "She's been using me? From the start?" Mike's eyes locked onto mine. "You were never the target. She was always 2 steps ahead. You just didn't see it." My world tilted. This whole time, I thought I was playing the game, I thought I had the upper hand. But the truth was, I had been nothing but a pawn. A pawn in a much bigger game that I hadn't even known existed. "Then why bring me here?" I asked, struggling to wrap my mind around it. "What's the point?" Mike's expression softened, but only slightly. To make sure you understand. This isn't your fight anymore. Emma and Ethan have already won. All that's left is for you to figure out what you're going to do with what you've learned. I stood there, frozen, as Mike's words sank in. The weight of it all pressed on me like a heavy stone lodged in my chest. Emma, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, had been playing me from the start. I wasn't the one in control. I wasn't even close. I had been nothing more than a piece in a game I didn't understand, a game I'd walked into blindfolded, thinking I was calling the shots. But Emma had been running the show all along. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was hard. My mind was racing, struggling to process what Mike had just revealed. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath me crumbling with each new revelation. Mike looked at me like I should have already figured it out. "Because I've been watching her. And I've been watching you. You think you're the victim here, but she's been one step ahead. Every move you've made, she's already predicted it." I shook my head, the disbelief still hanging on like a heavy fog. "So, all this time, she's been using me to cover her tracks? To keep me distracted while she, what? Builds some kind of empire with Ethan?" Mike nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "Something like that. You've been kept in the dark, but Emma's been playing both sides. She's been feeding information to Ethan and his group, and you were just, well, collateral damage." I felt sick to my stomach. It was like a punch in the gut. All the time I'd spent wondering, searching for answers, it had all been for nothing. The truth was right in front of me, and it made everything feel worthless. "You know, it's not just about what she's been doing with Ethan," Mike added, his tone almost casual now, as if this was all just another Tuesday for him. "It's about what she's been building. You weren't just a pawn in a romance or an affair. You were part of a bigger plan. She's got bigger things in mind than you'll ever understand." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Emma isn't who you think she is. She's a player in something bigger, something you can't even begin to comprehend. And it's too late for you to stop it now." I swallowed hard. The walls felt like they were closing in. My pulse raced, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of confusion and anger. "So what now? Do I just walk away from all of this?" Mike didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me for a long moment, as if measuring whether I was truly ready to understand what was happening. "You could," he said finally. "You could walk away. But I'm guessing you're not the type to do that. Not after everything that's happened." He was right. Part of me wanted to just leave, forget about it all. But the other part of me, the part that had been hurt, deceived, couldn't just walk away. I had to know more. I had to see it through. Even if it meant falling deeper into this mess. "I'm not walking away," I said, more to myself than to Mike. "I need to know everything. I need to understand what she's been hiding and what Ethan's role in all of this really is." Mike smirked, a look of approval flickering in his eyes. "I figured you'd say that. You're not as blind as you look. All right. I'll tell you what I know. But you'd better be ready for what comes next. It's not going to be pretty." I nodded, already steeling myself for whatever was coming. There was no turning back now. Whatever secrets Emma had been keeping, whatever dark plans she and Ethan had in motion, it was all coming to light. And I was going to be the one to uncover it, even if it cost me everything. Mike led me deeper into the factory, the dim light flickering overhead as we walked further into the shadows. We stopped in front of a large steel door, the kind that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys, unlocking the door with a slow, deliberate motion. The door creaked open, and the air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. But there, in the center of the room, was something I never expected, a large table, covered with maps, blueprints, and documents, all neatly arranged. It looked like something out of a spy movie, but this was real. And somehow, it felt even more dangerous than anything I could have imagined. "This," Mike said, gesturing to the table, "is what Emma's been working on. This is the bigger plan. And you're right in the middle of it." I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the documents, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. There were maps of properties, financial records, names of people I didn't recognize, and something else. Something that made my blood run cold, a list of names, all crossed out except for one. My name. It was at that moment, staring at that list, that it all clicked. I had never been part of Emma's life in the way I thought. I wasn't the man she loved. I was the final piece of a puzzle, something she needed to complete her plan. And now, I was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went.